Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Nextv Plus USA session on Entertainment 2.0, the User Experience Revolution. I'm Paul Erickson of Erickson Strategy and Insights, and I'm joined by a great set of panelists with us today to discuss an essential part of watching entertainment, where the rubber meets the road, the user experience. Today, we have an overload of choices when it comes to video consumption, from services to the content itself. And consumers are increasingly appreciative of better, faster, smarter, easier ways to find and get to what they want to watch. And for services and content owners, the competitive picture is crowded and fiscal pressures are mounting. So any competitive advantage or differentiator is crucial right now. And in our discussion today, we'll examine some of the ways that the user experience can be optimized and leveraged today and in preparation for the future. Our panelists have a diverse mix of perspectives and insights to give you on making the most of the user experience. And with us today, we've got Dan Grace, VP and Head of Entertainment AI at Comcast, John Lin, VP of Product at Sling TV, and Noah Vadnai, VP of Product for Global Content Discovery for Warner Brothers Discovery. Welcome, everyone. Dan, let's start with you. Briefly tell us a bit about yourself and your work at Comcast.
Yeah, absolutely. Great to be with everyone. Looking forward to the discussion. I've spent my career in a vast number of industries, coming from some absolute brand monsters in the digital space like Nike and Abercrombie and Fitch, and moving into Bank of America, where I led consumer-facing AI. At Comcast, I lead a massively large and important organization, Entertainment AI, that's focused on natural language understanding, natural language processing, the ubiquitous Comcast voice remote, content discovery, personalization, and search, media analytics and ad detection and ad insertion using ocular recognition. And I'm incredibly excited to be leading this organization. So I've been at Comcast for about 6 months. So this is my first time in media and entertainment. And it's an incredibly exciting place to be because it's such engaging content. And to your point, new lines of monetization, new lines of competition, and just a really great place to be maximizing AI and ML for the client user experience.
Perfect. Well, lots of challenges ahead for the industry, lots of opportunity for you. Thanks, Dan. John, how about you and your role at Sling TV?
Hey, thanks for having me, Paul. Do you guys hear me all right?
Yep.
Great. So I know it's some difficulty jumping in. Yeah, so thanks for having me again. I'm John Lin, lead the product management and design teams here at Sling TV. So for those of you who may not be as familiar with us, we are one of the leading live TV streaming providers here in the US. My teams are responsible for, I would say, the end-to-end customer's journey with Sling, starting from before they're a customer, right? You might end up on Sling.com after you've saw an ad for us, read about us, heard about us from one of your friends. And this is where prospective customers can shop and learn about our services. And then once you actually sign up or download our apps, our teams are responsible for all the apps that customers consume the video that you just sign up for, spanning the living room TV devices, mobile devices, as well as browser experiences. I've been here for a little over 2.5 years. And previously, I spent some time at CBS Sports Digital, where I most recently oversaw their digital video product and streaming operations.
Thanks, John. Noah, you're next up. Tell us a bit about you and your work at Warner Brothers Discovery.
Sure. Thanks for having me, and I'm glad to be here. I'm Noah Vadnai. I'm VP of Product for Content Discovery. So my team looks after all of the customer journeys relating to how someone finds something to watch. I joined Discovery in January 2020, right before the world went sideways. So it's been a bit of an adventure, and I was hired at that point to bring Discovery Plus to life. And since then, we've merged with Warner Media and formed this new company called Warner Brothers Discovery. So we're really excited to be working on this new enhanced product that's going to launch in spring 2023, which combines the strengths of both of these amazing content catalogs that have a ton of momentum behind them. But the challenges remain of like how do you they may be even amplified when you get even a bigger catalog, and how do you efficiently get people to the things they want, and how do we cross-pollinate between scripted dramas and non-scripted reality TV and documentaries and all the content types therein. So really big challenges, and content discovery, I think, will remain one of the big things to try to continually improve. I'm not sure it ever gets completely solved, but that's like where we really spend a lot of our energy, is how to think about how do you find the right pair, the right subscriber with the right content at the right time, and it's a big one.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, I'm not sure if it ever can be perfectly solved, but it's worth trying, right? And so it's in the quest to get there that we make advancements for the user, and we'll dive into that in a little bit. But before I get to that, last but not least, I'm Paul Erickson. I have nearly 2 decades of experience as an industry analyst with MPD, Parks Associates, IHS Markit, and Omdia, and I'm the founder and principal of Erickson Strategy and Insights, which is an industry and competitive analysis consultancy covering the media, entertainment, tech, and consumer electronics markets. So introductions out of the way. Quick note for the audience before we get into it, that we'll have a couple minutes for Q&A at the end. So be sure to submit your questions in the chat box to your right as they come to mind. So that way they're queued up and ready for us to get to at the end of the discussion. So let's dive in. Let's start with a big overarching general question to help kick us off and kind of help us understand each of your perspectives. What are the biggest beneficial changes from the consumer perspective that we've seen to the video consumption experience in these last 2 years of really rapid, wide-scale change? And this is for everybody here to jump in.
Sure, I'll start. I think the most obvious one is that we continue to have this amazing golden age of content where there's just so much choice. So putting aside any of the user experience questions or machine learning, it's just like there's so many amazing things to watch. So that's probably the biggest thing that's changed and continues to evolve. We may see some of that start to change a little bit over the next few years as the businesses make some harder decisions. But that's been front and center for us. And then really like the maturation of these feature sets across streaming makes it really easy for customers to get into a new service and dive right in without having a steep learning curve. So I think those two things in parallel and really make for a great user experience when it comes to sitting down on your couch and finding something to watch. But I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts.
Yeah, entirely. I think you hit it off right in the intro, right? The problem of content discovery across all of the producers, right? You have the addition of production companies, and Netflix and Amazon Prime creating their own content. The expansive growth of YouTube and individual creators on things like TikTok and YouTube, and then the rise of fast ads. You think of like 10 or 15 years ago, it was like, what is there on top? There's nothing good to watch. Now we have the opposite problem, right? We have so much propagation of content that it's how do I get you quickly into that experience? But you have across all of these criteria and all across these, just diverse set of interests, things that are always on and always available between the fast apps, between the streaming services, between linear television. And now it's, okay, there's a million things for me to watch. How do I determine what I want to do with my time and find that quickly and efficiently? But yet, obviously, the growth of different types of content production is the huge contributor to the user experience.
Yeah, for sure. I'd say, just to lean in on some of the things that, have been talked about, right? Content, right? If you think about it, as a product person, I like to think about the experience and things like that. But ultimately, what do users want? They come for great content and storytelling, right? You could have the most beautiful, intuitive user experience, an app works really well, seamless, whatever. But if you don't have the content people want to watch, like, it actually doesn't matter. No one's going to show up, right? Or no one's going to stick around. The rise of free ad-supported viewing options. We've seen a growth in that in terms of our Sling business as well. And interestingly enough, with the linear side, right? When I say linear, I'm not talking about traditional the TV business. I'm just talking about more of the format, right? This is like something that's on 24/7 all the time. You see a lot more services actually leaning into that, where when it started, it was really all sort of on demand. You got to choose, and so outside of the other virtual MVPDs such as us, but Pluto's really leaning to that format. You see more and more, both on Peacock and Paramount Plus. So it's really like what's old is actually now new again, right? This is really good because you can just, with all that great content, you could just throw something on and you don't have to think about it as much.
Yeah, thanks everyone. I think my 2 bits for this, for me, especially since I'm only an analyst looking at the industry, in the industry, as a almost pure consumer. I think for me, the most beneficial change that I've seen, and you could arguably say that Google kicked it off with Google TV, has been the trend towards super aggregation, right? From almost every single interface provider, user experience, company, and particularly streaming platform company, and whether we're talking, Roku to some degree, but particularly LG, Samsung, obviously Google, Amazon, and what have you. Everybody has started to push towards, in some way or another, putting content first, right? Getting out of app-related silos and so on. So I think from a fundamental perspective, whether that's because of competition or anything else, to me, I think that that's one of the most tangible ways that the consumer experience has improved. And I think that that's, that probably going to be, and we'll get to this later, one of the ways in which it can maybe be delved into further. But I'd agree, you have to look at things from the consumer perspective first, and how to really match the content that they're looking for, with the correct user, and to make it an efficient path to first playback, right? Or time to first minute of playback to get them there quicker. So a lot of things to solve. But I guess as part of that, the natural follow-up to that first big question is the second big question that comes right after that, which is, okay, we've covered the biggest beneficial changes. What are the biggest challenges that still remain to be solved, or new like user experience problems that are coming up that we've discovered with all of the rapid changes over this last year or two? Again, this is one that's open for anybody, but I'll nominate someone. John, how about you kick off this one?
Yeah. I mean, I think the last thing you mentioned is actually pretty important, right? You think about TV, let's dial back, a decade ago, really used to be a bundled experience, right? So like when you want to watch TV, say you come home from busy day of work, what do? You turn on the TV, you turn on the set-top box, and video magically appears, right? And by the way, if you don't like that, maybe hit channel up, channel down, maybe browse the guide. What's happening now, right, is as all the programmers are moving all the best content off of those networks and channels to their own service, like watching TV has really become, as you've mentioned, like, you lead with the customer. It's like, it's really frustrating, right? I have to remember, what app has which show I want to watch. It's really fragmented. And like, I need a spreadsheet to like keep track of where everything is, right? And I'm actually a spreadsheet person. A lot of people aren't. And, it's confusing for someone who's actually, and right, it's like, I'm in the industry and like, I'm still really confused. Like you ask my wife, she's like, I give up. Like, so still a lot of challenges there. I would say even once you actually get into the right app, like so much, how do we, with almost all that great content, still too much browsing, too many decisions to be made, content discovery, while we're all been working on it, it's still, still got a ways to go. I think also ads is an interesting topic here, right? So consumers also got used to, with streaming, not having any ads, right? And now you see the big holdouts, whether it's Netflix, whether it's Disney Plus, all introducing ad-supported services. So they all say, hey, we're going to start with low ad load so we don't annoy the users. But what inevitably happens is like, oh, shoot, we're missing our revenue numbers. Let's dial up that ad load so we can make that up. And, let's see where that ends. Hopefully it doesn't end up where, traditional pay TV is now, where you have, sometimes like 15 plus minutes of ads, per hour of viewing. Now for us and other pay TV providers, like, yeah, you can DVR and record it and then skip it, but we'll see. But even on our on-demand content that we make available, like I can't even watch it on my own service because it's so damn painful with that ad load.
All right. Thanks, John. Great MVPD related perspective there. I'd love to hear actually from not technically traditional pay TV anymore, but Dan, coming out of the Comcast fold, all the changes across pay TV and streaming, and now bringing all that together. What are some of the biggest problems that you see that still need to be solved?
That's entirely it, right? How do you make the recommendation, the browse, and the search experience seamless, right? We see this across all these catalogs, right? And you have this different recommendation engines inside of each one of them. And John hit it on the head. How do I remember where to get that content? I can do that immediately when you come into, say, a Comcast device on your screen on landing homepage and make you great recommendations across all of your permissions where you have content rights and you have your subscriptions. But then as we move through that, and this is where we lose a lot of the eyes and the focus on something like a TikTok, where I can just seamlessly flip through the experience and go through the content that I'm looking for. It's much more cumbersome when you're on a device, when you're on your television, to flip between those different, a Netflix or a Hulu or an Amazon Prime, where I might have content in a certain genre that I'm interested in, but it's not immediately accessible. How do I get to that place? How do I make that more seamless in the experience? Is the thing we need to solve here, because again, initial recommendations can be really good, but when you look through entire catalogs and aggregate the catalog, super aggregation, as you called it, that experience is much more difficult on your television device, on even a stream app, and across all of those streaming content than it is on, say, YouTube or on TikTok, where you just have that seamless flow of experience, much like you'd see like in a retail app, right? When you think of a retail app like Nike, great personalization in their own content and kind of a seamless experience you can flow through in different grids. Here, we kind of have that. How do we connect that? We know where everything's sitting, but how do we make that seamless experience as you try to browse through new content?
Thanks, Dan. And I think Noah, especially being at Warner Brothers Discovery, and the new reformulated Warner Brothers Discovery, so much content coming together from so many brands. Obviously from the content perspective, you've got your own view on the challenges that need to be solved, and Warner Brothers Discovery is in the process of solving many of them right now. So I'd love to hear your feedback on what you think the biggest ones are.
Yeah, really echoing what Dan and John said is, we've all had that experience of scrolling through rail after rail, not finding anything that works for everybody that it's in the room. So that's frustrating. But yeah, the whole premise of this merger between Warner Media and Discovery is that we're bringing together content catalogs that are complementary, and that they hopefully will yield great viewing options for whatever mood you're in, whoever you're watching with, the time of day. So our challenge on the content discovery side is how do we match those parameters together? And there's not a perfect solution yet, but interpreting all the signals that we get from our customers, whether that's something they save to their list or something they've watched in the past, or comparing them to other viewers that are similar to them. These are all things that we're all experimenting with, but I've been really interested in thinking about how we harness word of mouth and use some of the social channels that TikTok has been so good at, and really getting stronger at bringing that word of mouth, which is oftentimes the best recommendation you can get. I think we've all had that list going of something we heard from a friend or a cocktail party, and trying to keep track of that stuff. And I think there's an interesting feature out there that can bring that in a really really rich, easy to use, intuitive way. There's just no one size fits all here. We're going to have to think about all the different pieces and how they fit together, using ML, using AI, using great interface design, and bringing in that human word of mouth. So I think we're just starting to crack that code.
Yeah, and I think you bring up something interesting that is a very slight tangent, which I'll entertain for a second, but I'd agree that the industry has to also look seriously, not just at word of mouth, but as a part of that, and also as a source of content that's got a lot of traction. TikTok, right? I mean, we've seen a lot of my great ex-colleagues from Omdia, some of the research they published recently in MIPCOM and elsewhere, with pretty interesting statements that if you're targeting under 35, you have to consider TikTok, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, it's hugely consumed by everyone up to the 35-year age point. And so it is a good question, to consider for the future, and not like we have the answer now, but how do you integrate not just the word of mouth, but possibly content coming from the TikTok side as part of that total experience, right? And it's going to become increasingly important as you look at that younger segment of viewers. So, sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna add, yeah, I mean, we could do all the navigating we want about like our own little world, but like ultimately there are only so many hours in the day that you can spend time doing, being entertained in some way, right? Yes, you have to go sleep and you have to eat, and most people have to go to, probably on this call, have to go to work, right? Right, but like there's multiple forms of entertainment, and they're all fighting for the same attention and time. And yeah, you're right. Like we might be losing out to some of those other formats, whether it's TikTok, whether it's video games, and maybe some other format that hasn't been even invented yet.
Gaming's another one. I mean, one thing I think we can talk about here tangentially that is really important to us and the Comcast experience, and when you look at all the aggregation, is also the inclusion of live TV and day parting. So one thing that TikTok and Instagram Reels does really well is injecting static content with live streaming, right? Someone's on a live stream, and they do that crossover really, really well. So I might want to come in and watch, say, Yellowstone, but not if the Pittsburgh Steelers are on right now. How do I get to that place where I kind of thoughtfully really inject those day part moments so that I'm meeting the moments that matter as they occur for me as the user, and getting to that place? That's one of the things we're really working on a lot in our AI and ML, of making those recommendations, not just on static content, but also taking day part into consideration and say, hey, you're in the middle of this streaming series. That's great. But here's something we know about you in the moment to make that matter and make that recommendation, because that's really where we kind of lose out to those other experiences that they just seamlessly inject that. So you're flipping through and you're catching live stream while you're looking at static content.
Yeah, and I think, to kind of bridge to the next question, I think that, all of these that we've mentioned, probably solving them is of interest to the industry, all of these different problems. And as you mentioned, Noah, there's no one, let's say that stands out. There's a lot to handle at the moment, but it needs to be done, or at least work needs to be done to advance on any or all of them, just because we see that today every advantage counts, especially with the video service market getting increasingly crowded, and having a great, efficient, smart, perceptive, etc. user experience is definitely a potential advantage to leverage, especially when the need for differentiation is very high right now. And so from the optimal user experience perspective, if you're designing, developing, and maintaining a video service app, what are some of the core principles and best practices to follow? And I'm going to pitch this one to Noah because we see Warner Brothers Discovery in a rapid period of integration and change right now, and really, looking at maybe not starting from a complete blank sheet, but trying to bring things together in an app type experience, and however that's branded. What are the best principles to follow? Tell us a bit about that, Noah.
Sure. Well, we've had the advantage when we're building this new enhanced product that's going to come out next spring, 2023, of having two in-market mass market streaming services to draw some learnings from. So we've been able to leverage some of the both qualitative and quantitative data from both of those services and understand how those customers both are similar and different. But in terms of building the new service and some of the principles, we really are, we sweat all the details of great UI and UX and design, and striking a really strong balance between human and machine curation. But really, we want to always focus on being able to provide multiple entry points for people who are really interested in certain genres. And that's really a big lesson from the Discovery side, is that we have all these sort of genre-domes that are really important to people. They may not know all the shows that pertain to that, but if you're into home improvement, you might just be happy looking through that genre. So that's one side. And then on the HBO side, that we see this idea of like fandoms being front and center. So we want to be able to smartly provide these ingress points for both of those, for people who are super fans of like the DC catalog, or someone who's just wants to browse through and all of the hundreds and hundreds or thousands of episodes of House Hunters and find something that's interesting to them. So the principle there is really simplicity and just being able to really provide lots of entry points for this big catalog. It always comes back to the right content at the right time for the right customer. So yeah, not a one size fits all, but we're going to provide a lot of different options to explore based on your level of intent.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of those principles apply to a lot of companies in the industry, especially those here on this call. Dan, Dan and John, your companies, they both aggregate things together in different ways for the end consumer, and a lot of that still applies. Bringing together a lot of different types of content, different genres, different fandoms, and being able to bring it together in a way that's perhaps simple, at least at the outset, for the user, but allows them to get deeper and deeper into the things that they really want to look at from across a really, really diverse content library that each of your particular companies may be bringing to the consumer. So a lot of things to solve, but I think that, looking at simplicity and looking at really being able to tap, those areas of interest that are relevant to the viewer, that's essential to bringing people in and then maintaining their engagement as time goes on. So thanks for that, Noah. Next question. I think, I mentioned advantages earlier, and we think, having just also mentioned engagement is a great advantage. I mean, engagement is almost the advantage, beyond content, and it's of extremely high value in this competitive market. And every service wants to drive high engagement and really maintain it as long as possible. And so, a more intuitive and personalized content discovery experience is pretty much hand in hand with sustaining high engagement. And what are the ways that the industry can best utilize, those buzzwords we love, AI and ML, utilize AI and ML derived insights and smarter data and analytics to drive that better, smarter personalization and content discovery within the user experience. And this one goes to all of you, but Dan, how about you kick off this one?
Yeah, I'll say the one thing to be aware of, and we're all aware of this industry, is the increase in gaming becoming the thing that's driving engagement, right? And at what point how do you start to thoughtfully drive users into gaming when maybe they're searching or browsing for content, not finding what they want in a grid wallet? I thought it was interesting what John earlier was saying about browsing the grid guide. The fact that we're still using the grid guide after all this time is not a simplistic or easy way to navigate content. We make that simple, but how do we inject those moments, especially for younger demographics, where they tell us directly, gaming is much more important than watching content? How do we start to inject that into those domains? If I'm talking about, say, the Tomb Raider movies and moving them into Tomb Raider video games and things like that in this genre, I think is a huge part of that. And we're going to see that to continue to expand as younger generations move forward. When we're sitting here and I'm trying to get some type of form of entertainment before I flip off of the standard television, the standard streaming, and move over to my phone to look at TikTok or anything else, how do I get and interject that gaming in that moment? How do I have those catalogs available? How do I understand your permission rights, if that's on a PlayStation or an Xbox, or just kind of coming through the cable box or wherever else you might consume it on your phone? Of how do we get to that place where we're getting those moments of gaming, because it's increasingly important to users.
Thanks, Dan. John, what's your perspective from the Sling TV angle?
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely leaning more heavily into the AI ML to, ultimately, what's that all about? Get you the content you want to watch more quickly, right? Part of it is based on, yes, what you watch, who you are, but also we like to take into account also explicit signals, right? That, what channels did you favorite? What shows did you add to your watch list? So things like that. Actually, even, the other point is, actually what you buy. Right. So when I said, hey, you might have seen an ad, for example, Yellowstone, right? You click on the ad for Yellowstone, you end up on our site, it's like, oh, you get the package that you need to watch Yellowstone. Once you get in the app, right, maybe, you don't have existing viewership, but we know, hey, you came in looking for this thing, like we should surface that to you, right front and center, right? So, but beyond that, right, it's like, then it's all about how do we get the users to content they may not be aware of? Right? Like I said in the beginning, we have all this great content, but if you're not showing them all in the breadth and depth of one's catalog, then they'll be like, nothing to watch here. I'm going to disengage and go somewhere else, and whether watch another service or play games or whatnot. So it's really important to then surface up other things they may be interested in watching as well that they might not have been aware of.
Thanks, John.
I would say the other point too, to, by the way, make all that happen, especially when you're doing content recommendations, is you actually have to have pretty good and granular metadata about that piece of content too, right? Because if you have sort of high level generic type stuff and it's like, oh yeah, that's sports. Well, it's great. I could football as the rest of the world calls it and hate American football. But, if you don't have any sort of that distinction, then, your recommendations are going to be crap.
Right. So I think, we think about AI and ML and smarter data, and I think smarter and smarter metadata is part of that. And so whether it's, human curated or AI curated, the deeper and deeper we get into the nuances of how content can be matched with the user, simultaneously we have to get deeper and deeper levels of metadata, right, to get smarter about what we're matching when. Noah. Yeah. Speaking of utilizing AI and ML with so much content coming together at Warner Brothers Discovery, let's hear your perspective on this.
Yeah, I touched on it before. We're certainly doing all the same stuff that Dan and John are playing with and understanding all these signals and inputs. But my team's primarily looking at engagement KPIs. So whether that's minutes or hours per subscriber per whatever term. But then we're also working with our data science partners to think about what are some of the high value actions that we want to promote within the service. So we know that if someone watches X number of titles in their first week, they're likely to stay retained through the free trial and roll to pay. So understanding some of those high value actions as they pertain to all these sort of virtuous outcomes we want to get to, that's another big piece of it. And that's a combination of both good product work, as well as thinking about some of the ways AI and ML can help us promote to those high valued actions. So something like adding to your watch list as a 3-month tenured subscriber, we know likely means you're seeing value from the service, and that's like a leading indicator that someone is going to be retained. And retention is highly correlated, as everyone here knows, with engagement. So really trying to always keep that front and center when we're making prioritization and product decisions, and thinking about how those things can ladder up into ultimately a retained user that's seeing a ton of value. But the tactics around ML and AI, I think we're just starting to scratch the surface. We saw some amazing stuff happen this last couple of weeks with ChatGPT, which is just like mind blowing, and it's like, whoa, like how can we use that? Like what are some of the things that this new age of AI will unlock for us? I'm not even sure we have an idea of where that goes from here.
Yeah, and I think for me personally, how I look at it, I think it may be somewhat simplistic, but I think for AI and ML, probably the nexus of where I see the most value coming, and it does align with everybody, what all three of you have said. But to me, I think it goes together with engagement and especially retention, where the key is. Let me add nuance to this, especially now, as perhaps content budgets become more limited or more scrutinized, the ability to commission tons and tons of new content is limited. So really understanding how to both simultaneously, leverage your existing content library to the hilt, and on top of that, drive and maintain engagement with the consumer. I think you really do have to get smarter and smarter about what you're recommending to them, what they're finding and how you're keeping them watching. And really, like AI and ML is a key way to do that, when you're utilizing it for those objectives. And I think, Noah, I'll agree that it's just scratching the surface, and really, the huge amounts of data that we can bring in, about the user, about their habits and so on. You look at other things, the account, like what they're spending on, et cetera. There's so many things to bring in. And ultimately, we'll also have to balance the considerations of privacy, right? What can we sandbox and what can we bring in, and how big a set of data can we really start bringing together for the artificial intelligence and machine learning technologies to crunch on. But you're right, we've just started. So I'm interested in seeing how smart a lot of these algorithms get over time. I want to switch. Sorry.
One thing I was going to add there, actually, as much as fun and sexy it is to talk about AI and ML, and one thing you mentioned, which I think shouldn't be minimized, is that human curation part of that, right? Until we get to that point where we don't require it, but I think probably for the next little bit, I think that's still going to be an important element of the content discovery. You think about just and take it out of our realm, like New York Times, you go to the NewYorkTimes.com homepage, or the first screen of the app. It's not completely AI ML personalization driven, right? There's some editorial sort of element of what's the most important thing to know of the day.
Yeah. And the tools that go along with that, for that human curation, human machine balance, is really important. So my team's very closely partnered with what we call consumer algorithms, which is like the personalization product team, as well as the content experiences team that produces all the tools. So those tools are getting smarter and smarter, and enabling human editors to inject the right amount of machine learning or automation into their workflows. So that's a big sea change, I think. Whereas it was just sort of either or for years, now it's like giving those editors real control to say this rail should be automated and should bring in these attributes at this time, and that blend is getting much more sophisticated.
Yeah, we're doing a lot of that too on our side, and what I'll say is like the AI and ML, and it's coming from an AI and ML guy, like that helps us in the long tail of the catalog, making those really, really precise recommendations on all that metadata that can outpace us all the way down the catalog. But it was said by both Noah and John earlier, that word of mouth component is still a massive portion of this, right? People want to watch content, and content is worth watching because their colleagues are watching it, because their friends are watching it. And it gives you something to kind of relate to. I'm watching Yellowstone personally because my wife's watching Yellowstone. Everybody else is watching Yellowstone, right? It's not quite my forte, but there it is, right? So yeah, we have tons of metadata to use. We're sitting on top of our databases here, and that helps a lot with that kind of deep browse, deep search behavior, the long tail of the catalog. But those moments, those editorial moments, the moments that matter, the content worth paying for, is still very much a communal thing.
Yeah, and I think there's always going to be a necessary human element to it, no matter how great the AI and ML gets. Like, it's only as good as the people that are training those heuristics and those algorithms and those rules. And I think that there's constantly going to be something that is, you know, a qualitative aspect of it, like, you know, things that are happening socially, right? And whether that's news events, right, or that social phenomena, or, you know, popularity, or things that are hard to pick up from what's previously been understood by AI and ML, or something you see going on TikTok. Great. There's always going to be need for a human hand to put that intelligence in the system. So, you know, all of you are right. I think however smart it gets, it can only be as perceptive and quote unquote human in understanding what people need, because there's a human there driving some level of intelligence into those algorithms. Let me segue a little bit, although it's a bit tangential to this exactly, but it's still relating to AI. You know, the former darling, you know, related to AI over the last few years has been voice assistants, right? You know, we hear all the time about Alexa and Google and Siri, and, you know, and how they can be integrated into the video consumption experience. But, you know, we've seen all the headlines over the last few weeks, and, you know, the most recent month, over some of the budget cuts and reduced focus from some of these ecosystem vendors such as Amazon and Google when it comes to some of their voice related initiatives for Alexa and Google Assistant. But from my perspective, that doesn't mean that voice-based interactions or voice assistants are going away at all. Since they're here to stay, there's just going to be less impetus put behind them. Still, within the video consumption experience, I mean, what are optimal ways to leverage voice input, voice assistants, and if they're around in the household, smart speakers in the consumption experience based on lessons we've learned so far in the industry? And is there untapped potential there still yet to take advantage of when it comes to watching video? John and Dan, you know, you both work for companies that deliver, you know, these big selections of content into the household. You know, from a service provider perspective, or at least streaming service provider perspective, and traditional service provider perspective, you know, you guys can speak to this the best. You know, John, you first. I'd love to hear, you know, what Sling TV thinks about the use of voice assistants going forward.
Yeah, I think from a standalone device perspective, and we are on some of them, right? So the Amazon Echo Show, the Google Nest Home device. Yeah, I'd say they're cutting back on those things because, you know, they're probably not bearing the return that they originally expected. But by the way, even if they're cutting back, they're still probably investing amounts that, you know, dwarf all of us combined on this call by factors of order of magnitude or something like that, right? You have to look it up, but yeah, there's still probably a lot of investment going into that. But ultimately, I think, you know, for a voice service, I mean, text input on, like, you know, one of these things, still really, really crappy, right? And, you know, so I think the promise of voice is still there. Although, again, from my perspective, it's still a promise, right? It still doesn't work, you know, even after all those years, right? Not the last couple of years, but like decades of work on sort of voice recognition and, you know, those things like that. It still doesn't work as well as it should, right? You know, I try to use my Google Nest Home every morning and be like, hey, okay, Google, you know, play CNBC on Sling, and half the time it, like, you know, play some Spotify, you know, song that has nothing to do with business news, right? So it's like, seriously, like that's the most basic of use cases. If you can't even get that right, like, right. I don't know, like, so then I start, you know, for most people, they stop using that, right? For me, because it's my product, I keep trying, even though I know, you know, it's still going to suck. So, but to actually make it better, now, unfortunately, with these platform players, our goals aren't necessarily aligned. Right? They want their voice assistants, their voice to work across their entire device and operating system, right? To search across multiple services, stuff like that. Whereas, like, you know, if someone's in, say, the Sling app, you know, you pull it up, like, you know, if someone asks for CNN, like, I don't want them sending out to the CNN app, or, you know, CNN that might appear on Fubo TV. Like, I want them to stay in our app, but, you know, that's not what they want.
Right. Dan, from the Comcast perspective, I'd love to hear, you know, your thoughts on this also, since Comcast has put a lot of effort into voice and probably has a lot of feedback.
Yeah, we have it. And voice works really well when it's the easiest way to get to something, right? But the thing is, like, we spent so much time in natural language processing, understanding and collecting voices, understanding them. There's nothing really natural about putting your voice on top of a design, browse, search structure that exists in all of our experiences right now. Because if you said something to me ambiguous, I wouldn't give you 6 options back. I'd naturally ask you what it was you're looking for. That kind of disambiguation behavior, I think we're going to get to a tipping point in that right now, right? A lot of the investment in NLU and LP has been in recognizing voices, recognizing accents, getting your words translated into utterances, into intents. And then it's taking that and making sure that as people use it, when it works seamlessly. And if it's a single request, it pretty much works seamlessly, but that's not the way we engage with each other, right? So when you take like a voice request or voice query and you give someone a grid wall, it doesn't feel seamless. Of course, it's easier, as John just said, than putting it in on your remote, right? That's terrible, right? But that's kind of where we got to go right now. Like that's where our focus is. You know, we kind of mastered the accuracy, getting really deep on the accuracy. I'd say far field voice, a little bit different wake words and things like that we see in some of our products in the UK. I'm still working on those things, but taking that investment and then figuring out what's the design paradigm and experience that makes your request and query when you use voice much more like our natural conversation right here, which is more of that back and forth. So I see that that's really the gap we have right now in the streaming, in entertainment overall, and media, is that we've taken something that's very natural to us, voice. We're starting to recognize the voice and intent, but then we've overlaid it on a browse, search, navigation experience that just is not, seamless in that manner. It doesn't work the way that we speak. So that's where our focus is in investing those experiences and designing those out. And it's a bit more work. So I'd say, I think we're getting to a tipping point there where it just feels more natural to use voice to find deeper level queries.
And I think, from my past work, looking at voice assistants and smart speakers and so on, for Omdia and IHS Market, I think, one of the things that I took away from the industry is that, truly natural language processing, it's another one of those goals where it keeps moving, right? You can never get perfect natural language processing,
Sure.
but you can certainly advance on it. And then if there's effort put into domain specific libraries, right, that helps it. But it's a goal that's ever moving, yet, we continue to put effort, because it's worth it in some way, right? Especially for this sector, because, like John mentioned, you may really want to have a specific search intent in mind, and to articulate it via a, directional pad is brutal, right? I mean, you pretty much the only way to input that is still going to be voice. As inefficient as it is, or as inaccurate as it is, it still probably will get you there faster than putting it in letter by letter, right? Even with assisted completion. So I think voice isn't going away, but yes, we have to get smarter about how it's integrated and getting people to a desired result quicker. I'm going to make a quick cut to our last question here because we're going to run out of time, but I think it's a very important question and a good closing one to bring things together for the industry and consumers today, where we see so many different business models coming together today. For the consumer, they're bombarded by a choice of different types of services and business models, and the industry is challenged to integrate multiple business models together for the consumer, especially since traditional SVOD is not the growth darling that it was. It's now necessary to really address different areas of the market with different business models and different types of pricing, and whether that's subscription, that's ad supported, or that's free. And so we've got for the consumer, we've got the benefit of having access to traditional pay TV, SVOD services, AVOD services, hundreds of channels of fast streaming channels, and consumers can get overwhelmed by diving in and out of these different app experiences or switching sources, what have you. And from either the consumer or the business perspective, how do today's and tomorrow's user experiences best bring all of these different business models and service types into cohesive, personalized user experience for consumers? I hate to do this, but we only have 2 minutes before we get cut off. Lightning round, 1 to 2 sentences each. What do you guys think are the best ways to bring this together? John, you first.
Yeah, I'd say, back to what we were talking about earlier, right? The fragmentation, the confusion, right? So I'd say industries go through this pendulum swing all the time, right? It's bundled, then it gets unbundled, then it'll gradually rebundle. So, content aggregation, distribution, that's core to the DNA of Dish and Sling through our history. So, ideally in this particular angle, we'd love to be the one who bundles the services so consumers can either purchase, discover, watch both linear and say direct consumer content and free content in an aggregated user experience, all within our app. right? Maybe get multiple recommendations, etc. And we do this today with Discovery Plus and 50 other smaller services, hopefully HBO Max soon, with that Prime Video announcement recently in the new Max app. But there are a lot of barriers there. So
okay, John, thanks for that. Noah, real quick, from your perspective, 1 or 2 sentences, how do we bring it all together? Noah, you're muted.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, it's definitely getting a little overwhelming, as you said, but I do think all these different business models are sort of democratizing the way people can access these services at different price points and different levels of commitment. So I think that's really a great thing. And you know, like in all products, I think it's all experimentation right now. So there's lots of stuff being tried, and ultimately, I think we'll see a lot of this stuff start to come together in these super aggregator interfaces, and you'll have lots of choice in how you want to, commit and watch and dig in and dig out. So I do think choice is a really good thing.
Thanks, Noah. Dan, your turn, real quick.
I'll agree. I'll agree that choice is incredibly important. It's really getting really good at predicting what part of those values in those packages drive value to you as the end user, right? So there's little segments each side of those streaming services that I really like personally, that anybody else in our household likes, making those predictions to say, where is it that you find the most value and maximize your value and get you access into those pieces is really kind of our focus and what I think the way to unlock this.
Thanks, Dan. And thank you all. That's all the time we have, and we're really at the cutoff. So I need to close our discussion. So, I'd like to thank Dan from Comcast, John from Sling TV, and Noah from Warner Brothers Discovery. Thank you all for your great insight today. And thank you, everyone in the audience, for joining us for this discussion. And take care.
Thank you.
Thanks.